Hey Roosters, and welcome back to another episode of Making My Own Trading Card Game. In today's video, we're going to define more of what our mechanics or core mechanics of the game are going to be, and we're going to decide on what we actually want for this game going forward. There's a lot of things you can come up with at this point and make a good trading card game. After you came up with the base idea, you can expand the lore, and you can do a lot of different things with the card game, but for me personally, I think getting a core mechanics, designing a rough layout of what the game's going to be like in gameplay terms is much more important than all the other options. So let's get right into it. In today's video, we're going to define what our core mechanics for this TCG is going to be. If you didn't watch our last video, I very much suggest you do that. It's going to give you a base idea of what the series is going to be about, but also some of the core ideas and mechanics that we already decided for the card game. But in the last video, for a quick review, the design mechanics that I wanted to implement in the game, the design ideas, they weren't really mechanics in any way, but ideas that I wanted to implement in the game were three. So we had the fact that I wanted it to be a dueling card game. I sort of explained what that meant in my last video, but it basically means I wanted it to be a head-to-head, you pick one character and build a deck around that one character. And then I wanted to be also have a sort of stamina mechanic where as you play cards, you have an energy source or stamina resource that acts as your health and your resources throughout the game. And then for the third and final mechanic that I wanted to add into the game in some shape or form was going to be a sort of balancing mechanic in the way that throughout the game they're going to have two separate different fields of something that you're going to have to balance. Now, I didn't really decide exactly how I wanted to implement that in the game, but today we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But I wanted it to be something that where you don't want to dial in on one or the other, and you're going to have to find a balance between the two different fields or two different ideas or concepts that are going to be in the game that you're going to have to keep in a sort of equal level so that you can progress throughout the battle. So before we talk about any new ideas I want to add to, any new mechanic or design ideas I want to add to the game, let's talk about and flesh out the ones that I talked about in the last video. So the first was I wanted it to be a dueling card game. Now I went over what that meant in the last video, so go watch that. But generally what that means is I'm going to have a character and you're going to have a character, and it's going to be a 1v1 duel between our two characters, and we're going to have decks that are going to help them in that endeavor. So how am I going to make this work? Well, you're going to have a character card, and I'm going to have a character card, and then I'm going to, we're both going to have decks, and so I think the decks are going to probably have like attack cards like most card games do, and I think although a lot of dueling card games do this, some don't, but a lot of them do, I think it's important to have the attacks and the defense cards sort of be one and the same, like have dual use. You can either use them to attack or use them to defend, which means that really only covers one card type that is going to encompass this game. So what other cards can you have in the deck? So obviously I want this game to have some upgrading, but I don't want the upgrading to go out of control. So something in like Universus, you play down Foundations, which are not upgrades, but they sort of fill that void in the sense that they're going to make your character more powerful over time. But something like Flesh and Blood does the opposite, where you start out with equipment on the field, and then you lose them as the game goes along, and they get destroyed. And I don't want to do the Flesh and Blood route, but I don't want it to be like Universus, in which at the end of the game, your character is going to be like completely just a bunch of cards, giving them a bunch of different abilities to use during your turn. Not that I have anything against Universus, I actually really like the game, but what we're talking about here is that I want it to be a little more tame when it comes to the idea of upgrade cards. So I definitely want upgrade cards in the game, just they're not going to be as bountiful, and they're not going to be as, and not that powerful. They're going to be like here and there, maybe a certain upgrade card that you really want to play with a certain character, but for the most part, it's going to be like some decks will play them, some decks might not even use them at all, something like that. But that's the basic idea I want for the upgrade cards, and that leaves some other slots open for cards in your deck. So obviously you're going to have your action card or your instant or whatever you want to call it, the card that doesn't really do any damage, it just does something, some utility effect, and then goes to the discard pile. I think that's important, and I think realistically that's all I'm thinking about for the card game right now, those three card types. And that seems to be quite a little bit, especially being the fact that I just simply stated that I don't want the upgrade cards to be a big part of the game, meaning that generally that's going to leave you with really one or two different types of cards in your deck. But that's how I'm thinking about it right now, and I'm thinking of what else I might want to add to the game. Of course, I'm trying to come up with different ideas later, but right now, that's all I can think of, and I think it's going to, if you design the game well enough, it's going to lead to some pretty fun and interactive gameplay. So I sort of fleshed out the dueling card game, but there wasn't much to flesh out there because it's already a sort of idea that most people have already understand. They already understand what it means. So let's move on to something that I didn't really explain too much of, but it's going to be really quick and simple to explain. That was the whole idea of having a stamina mechanic. So what did I mean when I said I wanted to have a stamina mechanic? Quite frankly, it's going to be very simple. And it's going to be, you're going to have a certain, each character is probably going to have a different amount, but a certain amount of energy to start the game with. And throughout the game, you're going to spend that energy to play cards, attacks, and probably actions too. And then you're going to, when that number runs out, you're going to die. And as you take damage, it's going to take away from that number. And so it's going to make it a very limited resource. And so you're going to have to be very smart with how you use it. And I like that idea. I've seen that in other games do the similar thing, and I want to do it as well. And so it's going to make you want to feel like, okay, well, I can play this really big attack. Now that its numbers are a lot bigger than the smaller attacks, but at the same time, I'm also taking away from my life. And if you play other card games that use life as a resource, such as Yu-Gi-Oh!, which is what life points have essentially became in Yu-Gi-Oh!, then you'll find that it definitely leads to some interesting gameplay, and it doesn't lead to not wanting to attack at all. Because if you look at Yu-Gi-Oh! Game, people are completely fine with spending their own life points to get stronger abilities. So if you are incorporating this as one, it's definitely going to lead to obviously some important choices. Sometimes you're going to say, well, maybe I don't want to step on the gas because I need to see how things are going to shake out. I need to budget, and I need to sort of limit myself because I could end up burning myself out. But then, of course, there are going to be games where I gotta, it's all in. I gotta play the strongest card. I gotta play a lot of them, and I gotta do whatever I can because if I don't win now, I might not win at all. And I kind of like that idea for a card game, and that's why I wanted this mechanic to be in the game. So let's talk about the third and final idea and mechanic that I came up with in yesterday's video, or rather in the last video. So that's going to be a sort of balancing mechanic, and I was very vague about this, and I'm not sure I really got the point across to all of you guys, but that's because I probably didn't really understand what I wanted from this sort of idea before, but now I do, and important that I knew that I wanted it then, and now I understand what it is that I actually wanted. And of course, this is subject to change, but I'm pretty happy with this idea and this concept. So the idea is that you're going to have two extra resources to spend throughout the game, addition to your stamina and your life points and your energy source, right? So you're going to have three different resources to technically manage, but obviously the stamina is going to be really simple. You spend it and it's your life, and it's, I think most people are going to be able to wrap their heads around that pretty easily. And now these ones over here, they're going to be, these new two resources that you're going to have to manage throughout the game is going to be a sort of balancing mechanic. So you can't allow one resource to be more than the other. You want to keep them equal. And throughout the game, you're going to gain more, and as you spend them, they're going to go away forever throughout the game. Obviously, you can gain more throughout the game, unlike stamina, which is going to be, obviously, you're going to have some heal cards here and there, but it's going to be pretty limited. This one is not really limited, except it is consumable. As the ones you use, you don't get back. You have to get more. So, like in Magic the Gathering, if I play a land, I spend it that turn. Next turn, I get to use that same land again, and maybe another one. Well, in this game, if I get a resource, I spend it. Next turn I get a new resource, but I don't get the old one back. I just have one. So if I spend my one resource in turn one, turn two, I have another one, but it's still just one spend. And the point is that as you gain more, you don't want more to become, you want one of these resources to become more than the other. This is going to put a little hindering on the way people play. You can't just spend all of one resource and not worry about the other resource to get a certain amount of effects. You have to sort of mitigate the other one some way, whether playing cards or in the game, I'm going to have a mechanic where you expend resource from your character card. And each character is going to have their own expend value, and you're going to be able to spend that much of any resource per turn. It doesn't do anything. The only thing it does is that it just gets rid of it, so you can have them equal. So you want to manage this two things, but sometimes you're going to want to play cards that are going to disrupt that balance. So it's going to go beyond the amount you can expend per turn. The amount that you can spend per turn is not the amount you can spend per turn, but it's the amount you can get rid of without any extra mechanics or cost to it. So as you spend these resources, you're going to get different powerful effects, but you have to make sure you keep them equal, or else you're going to have some negative effects. So one of the negative effects, so we're going to have probably one that's going to be sort of represent more dark energy, and the other one more light. Now that sounds a little vague, but if you're a card game player, you kind of know what I'm trying to get at here, because you've seen it almost everywhere. But the point is, if you allow your dark one to get higher than your light one, if you allow your evil to get higher than your good, you can become corrupted, and then as you take actions, you start taking damage. And though you can still continue to do stuff, you are going to have a big penalty, right? But if you get your light to get higher than your dark, or your good to get higher than evil, then you're going to become too passive, and you're going to not be able to attack anymore, and you're going to have to try to mitigate this before the game goes on too long, because obviously then you're probably just going to lose, because you're going to start not be able to really play the game as well. So like I said, this is subject to change, and obviously it's not exactly it's not exactly how I want it to be at this point. So like it's not exactly perfect right now, because obviously I'm still creating the card game, and right now we're only at a very early stage of creating this card game. But the card game is going to evolve and expand more as we play more, and as I test more, and as I come up with more ideas. Maybe I'm going to think of a new way to sort of balance two ideas and two concepts. I'm probably going to maybe like it more than this one, and then maybe this one's going to have to be reworked into a new one so that I can move forward with the card game. But this idea of balancing two separate mechanics, two separate systems, two separate energies, two separate aspects of play, it's really important to me, and I think it's something that I want in this card game. So I don't think it's something I'm going to let go as a concept. But really, that's just a rough idea of how the concept is going to be. As rules come out, as I come up with the rules for the game, as different mechanics and different ways you can play cards and attack, and this, that, and other comes out for the game, as I come up with it, then obviously this might become a little more defined. It might change it a little bit, but I'm pretty happy with this sort of concept. And I think as I move on with future videos, you'll be able to understand exactly what I'm going for here in this design aspect. Now, I don't want this video to be too long, but I also think that there's a lot more information I can put in this video without it becoming too long and too bogging down. So that is, I want to add another core mechanic to the game. And this is something I didn't at all talk about in the last video, but it's going to be really fundamental to the game. And I'm a little bit hesitant on whether or not I really want to push this in the game, or if I don't want to include it at all. That's why I was really contemplating whether to put in this video or not, because I came up with it after making the last video. And it's a little interesting. So I wanted to have a board, and I don't want it to be a board game. And so finding a way to make a card game with a board that isn't a board game is really important. And it's really hard to do for some people, for designers. And I'm not a master designer, so I don't think I've cracked that code here. So the board is going to have a minimal, it's going to have a big impact on gameplay, but it's not going to be a board in the way you see a board normally. It's going to be a board for movement only. And so what's going to happen is I want it to be sort of a landscape, an arena that everybody's fighting in, and we're fighting, or rather, I'm fighting against you in. And if there's multiple players, 3, 4, then, which I hope the game can support smoothly, then we're all going to be in this arena. We're all going to be fighting each other in a free-for-all, right? But we're not going to be moving around this board and attacking each other, and it's not going to be our little chess pieces as we use cards to attack. That's been done quite a few times. I want to do something a little bit different. So what's going to end up happening is that as you move throughout the board, it's going to be sort of an overworld to the game. And as you encounter other players, you get brought into the card game aspect of the game, which is going to be the battle system, the combat systems. Just like in, say, Pokemon, the video game is talking about, you move around in the overworld or in the real world, and then you encounter somebody, and then the world gets transformed. The overworld doesn't really matter anymore. It just gets straight down to battles, and that's sort of what I want to happen in this idea that I'm bringing to the game. And I also want some other mechanics that come from this, really. I want some ideas of, well, using the place you're fighting in to your advantage, because certain dinosaurs, certain insects, or stuff like that, they rely on their environment to win. They rely on the place they're in to their advantage. And so there could be like water areas where if you have a sort of a aquatic creature, then you're going to be able to gain some benefits from being in that area. So trying to lure your opponent onto your home turf, or rather trying to force your opponent onto your own turf to gain effects and different abilities is going to be really cool. But also just to be able to just to be able to get different effects from being on different places in the board will be pretty cool too. Even if you're not, say, an aquatic animal, just certain things you can get from being near water would be pretty cool. So it makes maybe both players want to go to the water, or the pool, or the lake, or whatever it's going to be, so they can get certain effects during the game. And maybe if you're playing more aggressively, you might want to play take base up in more of a lava or a volcano area of the board, or whatever it might be. So it's just a concept that I was thinking of that I kind of want to add to the game, because this game is about dinosaurs. And when I think about dinosaurs, I don't think about dinosaurs in a sort of head-to-head way, but I also don't see them in, like, dinosaurs don't really team up. It's not really dinosaurs don't fight in gangs, I mean. not we don't know what dinosaurs did, but not usually, not iconically. I guess five Velociraptors are sort of known to fight in gangs, but that's sort of one type of dinosaur, and probably could be a cool mechanic to explore for a card in the future. But the point is, I think of dinosaurs in arena almost like gladiators, and then not gladiators, but they're in sort of like a battle royale type thing. That's why I see the world of dinosaurs, and so I think I wanted to add that into the game a little bit. And the same thing sort of goes with insects. That's sort of how insects live. They're wild animals, and so although there are fighting against another animal in sort of a head-to-head battle, at the end of the day, every animal around you, every other creature around you is out for blood, and you sort of have to be on your toes. The only thing about this certain mechanic that I'm a little bit on the fence of, which is why I'm really not sure if I want to keep it in the game or not, but it's something I have to figure out and think more on, is why you would want to engage your opponent. It's because if I'm in a creature who benefits from being a certain place, and you're a creature who benefits being a completely different place, why would we come close to each other to start combat? Why would we initiate combat between each other? And so that's something I want to think about. Maybe we could do some sort of point system of time runs out before a certain amount of time. If I have this many, this, that, the other. I'm not sure. But the point is, I'm going to either come up with an idea that's going to force players to battle, or probably end up scrapping this idea from the card game. That's all for today's video. I know I mostly just repeated some other stuff I said in the last video, but I think this video allowed me to talk more about each of the different ideas and gameplay concepts that I came up with in the last video and sort of put them out there. And I think it's going to, as we move forward, having this sort of core base of how the game's sort of going to be, how the different mechanics are going to end up working, it's really important. Obviously, I didn't talk about game flow yet, how the turn's going to flow. And obviously, that's something that I think really changes a lot depending on how the rules come. And I think that's something I can go over a little bit later. But right now, I felt that coming up with these design elements were really important. But that's going to be it for today's video. Come back next week for the next episode where I talk more about this card game and I continue my journey creating my own homemade trading card game. And I hope you guys all enjoyed today's video, and I hope to see you guys in the next one.